Returned to Moonhaven, the salty breeze carried memories that Celeste Rivera had tried to bury for 5 long years. Her rental car wound along the coastal highway toward Moonhaven, each familiar landmark striking her heart like a physical blow. The lighthouse stood sentinel over the harbor. It's the weathered pier where fishing boats bobbed in the evening tide. The cluster of Victorian houses climbing the hillside like colorful barnacles clinging to rock. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white against the black leather. Everything looked exactly the same, as if time had stopped the moment she fled this place, with her heart shattered and her soul burning with rage. But Celeste had changed. The naive 22-year-old marine biology student who had once walked these streets hand in hand with her first love was gone, replaced by a woman hardened by years of sleepless nights and an all-consuming thirst for justice. The radio crackled with local news as she descended toward the town center. The parole hearing for convicted murderer Jake Morrison will take place next week. Morrison was sentenced to 15 years for the brutal killing of local college student Adrian Blackwood 5 years ago. Celeste's breath caught. She reached over and snapped the radio off, her hands trembling with barely controlled fury. Jake Morrison. The name tasted like poison on her tongue. The man who had destroyed her world, who had taken away the only person she had ever truly loved. The man who was now seeking early release from prison, while Adrian lay cold in his grave. She pulled into the parking lot of the Seahorse Inn, the same place where she and Adrienne had shared their first kiss on a warm summer evening. The memory hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment she was 20 again, breathless with the intensity of first love. Adrian Blackwood had been everything. She wasn't confident where she was shy, outgoing where she was reserved, fearless where she was cautious. He was studying environmental law while she pursued marine biology, both passionate about protecting the ocean they both loved. Their relationship had been a perfect storm of intellectual connection and physical attraction that left them both dizzy with possibility. She remembered the way his dark eyes would light up when he talked about his dreams of reforming environmental policy. The way his hands felt warm and strong when they intertwined with hers during long walks on the beach. The way he would kiss her forehead when she was stressed about exams, whispering that everything would be okay. But everything hadn't been okay. One rainy October night, Adrien had called her, his voice tight with excitement. "Celeste, I found something big. Something that could expose the illegal dumping that's been poisoning our coastline. Meet me at the pier in an hour."
Hour.
Those were the last words she ever heard him speak. She had arrived at the pier to find police cars, ambulances, and Adrian's lifeless body floating face down in the dark water. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and within 48 hours, Jake Morrison, local fisherman with a history of violence and drug abuse, had been arrested and charged with murder. Now, 5 years later, Celeste checked into her room at the inn with grim determination. She had one purpose in returning to Moonhaven: to make sure Jake Morrison never saw freedom again. She had spent years building her case, collecting character witness statements, documenting his history of violence, preparing for this moment when she would stand before the parole board and ensure justice was served. But first, she needed to see him face to face. The confrontation the next morning. Celeste drove to the county jail, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She had arranged the visit through Morrison's public defender, claiming to be a journalism student researching his case. The lie came as Alicia had become an expert at deception over the years, at hiding her true feelings behind a mask of professional composure. The visiting room was exactly what she had expected: sterile white walls, metal tables bolted to the floor, the acrid smell of disinfectant trying unsuccessfully to mask human desperation. When Jake Morrison shuffled in, wearing orange prison garb and shackles, Celeste felt her breath catch. He looked older than his 35 years. His once thick brown hair now streaked with premature gray, his face gaunt and lined with the weight of incarceration. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted her nightmares, were exactly as she remembered them. Cold, calculating, empty of remorse. "Well, well," Morrison said as he sat down across from her, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I was wondering when Adrian's little girlfriend would show up. You're looking good, Celeste. Real good." His gaze traveled over her body with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. "I'm not here for pleasantries," Celeste said, her voice steady. Despite the rage boiling in her chest, I'm here to look you in the eye and tell you that I will do everything in my power to make sure you rot in this place. Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Still carrying that torch for Golden. Boy, huh? 5 years and you still can't let it go. That's dedication. I'll give you that. You murdered him, Celeste said, leaning forward across the table. You killed the kindest, most brilliant man I've ever known. And for what? Money? Drugs? Some petty grudge? Something flickered across Morrison's face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion? You really believe that, don't you? He said softly. You really think I killed your precious Adrienne? The evidence was clear. Your fingerprints were on the murder weapon. You had motive, you had opportunity. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its mocking edge. You know what the funny thing is, sweetheart? I did a lot of bad things in my life, hurt a lot of people, but killing Adrienne Blackwood ain't one of them. Celeste felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're lying, am I? Morrison leaned back in his chair, chains clanking. Tell me something, Celeste. In all your research, in all your obsessing over this case, did you ever wonder why a small-time drug dealer like me would bother killing some college boy? What exactly was my motive supposed to be? The question hit her like a physical blow, because she realized with growing horror that she didn't know. In all her years of rage and grief, she had never questioned the official narrative. The police had said Morrison was guilty, the evidence had seemed clear, and she had been too devastated to look deeper. She began, but Morrison cut her off. Here's another question for you, he continued, his pale eyes boring into hers. If I killed your boyfriend, why did I stick around town for 2 whole days afterward? Why didn't I run? Why didn't I get rid of the supposed murder weapon? Celeste's mouth went dry. These were questions she had never considered, inconsistencies that had never occurred to her grief-stricken mind. Morrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I may be a lot of things, Celeste, but I ain't stupid. I sure as hell ain't a killer. Someone set me up real good. And you've been so blinded by your need for revenge that you never bothered to ask who. Seeds of doubt the drive back to Moonhaven passed in a blur. Celeste's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, Morrison's words echoing in her mind like a curse. Could she have been wrong all these years? Could the man she had spent half a decade hating be innocent? She parked at the harbor and walked out onto the pier where Adrienne had died, needing to feel close to him, needing to think clearly. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have taken her breath away under different circumstances. Now the beauty felt like mockery. Standing at the spot where Adrienne's body had been found, Celeste forced herself to really think about that night for the first time in years. She had been so consumed by grief that she had never questioned the official story, never looked beyond the surface of the investigation. But now, with Morrison's words ringing in her ears, inconsistencies began to emerge from the fog of her memory. Why had Adrienne been at the pier that night? He had said he found something about illegal dumping. But what exactly? And why meet at the pier instead of somewhere safer? Her phone buzzed with a text message, startling her from her thoughts. The number was unknown, but the message made her blood run cold. If you want the truth about Adrienne Blackwood's murder, meet me at the lighthouse at midnight. Come alone, and don't tell anyone. There are people watching. Celeste stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Someone else knew something about Adrienne's death. Someone who had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to make contact. As darkness fell over Moonhaven, Celeste realized that her journey for justice was just beginning. Everything she thought she knew about that terrible night was about to be turned upside down. And the stranger who had sent that message held the key to a truth that would shatter her world all over again. The lighthouse beams swept across the water in its eternal rotation, and Celeste knew that in a few hours she would finally learn who had really killed the love of her life. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle the answer. The lighthouse stood like a ghostly sentinel against the star-studded sky, its beam cutting through the darkness in hypnotic sweeps. Celeste approached on foot, having parked her car a quarter-mile away to avoid detection. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound made her heart skip a beat. She clutched her phone tightly, the mysterious message still glowing on the screen. The lighthouse keeper's cottage had been abandoned for years, its windows dark and empty. But as Celeste rounded the base of the tower, she saw a figure emerge from the shadows, a tall man with dark hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. "Celeste Rivera," he said, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" she demanded, stopping a safe distance away. "What do you know about Adrian?" The stranger stepped into a pool of moonlight, and Celeste's breath caught. He was devastatingly handsome, in a dangerous way, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and an intensity that made her skin tingle despite her fear. He wore all black, from his leather jacket to his boots, like he was dressed for stealth or trouble. "My name is Dante Cross," he said, pulling out a worn leather wallet and showing her a press badge. "I'm an investigative journalist, and I've been looking into your boyfriend's murder for 3 years." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Why? What's it to you?" Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment pain flashed across his features. Because Adrian Blackwood wasn't the first person to die for what he discovered? "My sister Emma was killed 6 months earlier in what the police called a random mugging in Seattle." But there was nothing random about it. The conspiracy unfolds. Dante led her to a small boat moored at the base of the lighthouse, its cabin filled with boxes of files, photographs, and documents. The cramped space smelled of coffee and determination, the walls covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and photos connected by red string like a detective's murder board. Emma was an environmental lawyer, Dante explained, lighting a small lamp that cast dancing shadows across the evidence. She stumbled onto something big, a network of companies illegally dumping toxic waste along the Pacific coast. When she got too close to the truth, they silenced her. He pulled out a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and Dante's same dark hair. She was working on a case involving Meridian Industries when she died. 3 days later, all her files disappeared from her office. The police said it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing else was taken. Celeste picked up a manila folder marked Blackwood A. Her hands trembled as she opened it to find copies of Adrian's research notes, phone records, and photographs she had never seen before. "How did you get these?" she whispered. "I've been investigating for 3 years, Dante said, his voice heavy with grief and anger, following every lead, connecting every dot. Emma wasn't the only one. There have been 5 suspicious deaths in the past 3 years. All people who were investigating environmental crimes tied to Meridian Industries." He spread out a map of the coastline, marked with red X's. "Look at this. Each location corresponds to an illegal dump site." And here he pointed to Moonhaven's harbor. "This is where Adrian found the evidence that got him killed." Isaiah studied the documents, her mind racing. Jake Morrison, his fingerprints were on the murder weapon. A pipe wrench that belonged to him, yes. But think about it, Celeste. Morrison was a known troublemaker, a perfect fall guy. It would have been easy for someone to steal his wrench, use it to kill Adrian, and plant evidence to frame him. Who would do such a thing? Dante's expression darkened. Someone with enough power and money to orchestrate a cover-up? Someone who knew Adrian was getting close to exposing their operation. He pulled out another file, this one containing financial records and corporate documents. Meridian Industries has been dumping toxic waste in these waters for years, saving millions in proper disposal costs. When environmental activists started getting too close to the truth, they began eliminating the threat. Celeste felt sick. "You're saying Adrian was murdered because he discovered their illegal dumping?" "I'm saying your boyfriend died because he was brave enough to stand up to corporate corruption. And Jake Morrison has been rotting in prison for a crime he didn't commit." The boat rocked gently in the harbor as Celeste absorbed this information. Everything she had believed, everything she had built her life around for the past 5 years, was crumbling. "There's more," Dante said quietly. "I know who ordered the hit." He pulled out a photograph of a distinguished man in an expensive suit, standing next to a luxury yacht. "Marcus Whitmore, CEO of Meridian Industries." He's been covering up environmental crimes for over a decade, and he's eliminated anyone who threatened to expose him. Celeste stared at the photo, memorizing every detail of the man who had destroyed her life. How do we prove it? We don't, Dante said. At least not yet. Whitmore is too powerful, too connected. But there's someone else, someone who's been helping him cover up the murders. Someone right here in Moonhaven. Dante's green eyes met hers, and she saw the weight of terrible knowledge in their depths. The person who's been feeding Whitmore information about environmental investigations. The person who knew exactly when and where to strike. He paused, his hand covering hers. Celeste, I'm sorry. But the person who betrayed Adrian, who set up Jake Morrison, who's been helping Whitmore cover up these murders, it's someone you trust. The final revelation. What do you mean? Celeste whispered, though deep down she already knew the answer would break her heart all over again. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Financial records, bank transfers, phone logs, all pointing to one person who's been on Meridian's payroll for the past 6 years. With trembling hands, Celeste opened the envelope. The documents painted a clear picture: monthly payments, encrypted communications, meeting schedules. But it was the signature at the bottom of a consulting agreement that made her world collapse. Professor Martin Hayes, she breathed. Her graduate advisor, Adrian's mentor. The man who had comforted her after the murder, who had helped her through her grief, who had encouraged her to build a case against Jake Morrison. The man she had trusted with her pain. He was feeding information to Whitmore, Dante explained gently. Every time a student got close to uncovering the illegal dumping, Hayes would report back. When Adrian found evidence that could bring down the entire operation, Hayes arranged for him to be eliminated. The betrayal cut deeper than the original loss. He sat at Adrian's funeral, Celeste said, her voice breaking. He held my hand, while I cried. He helped me prepare my testimony against Morrison. He needed you to believe Morrison was guilty, Dante said. Your testimony as the grieving girlfriend would carry weight with the parole board. He was using your pain to keep an innocent man in prison. Celeste felt rage building in her chest, not the cold, calculated anger she had nursed for 5 years, but something hot and primal. Where is he now? It's the thing, Dante said, checking his watch. He's supposed to meet with Whitmore tonight, right here in Moonhaven. They're planning their next move, how to handle Morrison's parole hearing. How to deal with you now that you're asking questions. How do you know this? Dante smiled grimly. I've been intercepting their communications for months, and they think they're safe, but they're about to walk into a trap. The sound of footsteps on the dock made them both freeze. Through the small window, Celeste saw 2 figures approaching: Professor Hayes and a man she recognized from the photograph as Marcus Whitmore. They're early, Dante whispered, quickly gathering the evidence. We need to get out of here. But it was too late. The boat lurched as someone stepped aboard, and Hayes' familiar voice called out, I know you're in there, Celeste. We need to talk. Dante handed her a small recording device. Keep this running, he whispered. No matter what happens, we need their confession. The cabin door opened, and Professor Hayes stepped inside, looking older than Celeste remembered. Behind him, Marcus Whitmore filled the doorway, tall, imposing, with cold eyes that held no mercy. Celeste, Hayes said sadly. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. You killed him, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You killed Adrian and let an innocent man rot in prison. I protected you, Hayes replied. Do you have any idea how dangerous this information is? How many people would have died if Adrian had exposed Meridian's operations? So you had him murdered instead. I tried to reason with him, Hayes said. But he was stubborn, just like you. He wouldn't listen. Whitmore stepped forward, his voice like ice. This has gone far enough. You've caused us considerable trouble, Miss Rivera, but it ends here. Actually, Dante said, standing up and revealing a gun in his hand, it ends with you confessing to 5 murders and Jake Morrison walking free. The next few minutes were a blur of accusations, confessions, and desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Hayes broke down completely, admitting to his role in the cover-up. While Whitmore tried to maintain his composure, even as Dante's evidence painted him as the architect of multiple murders. When the police arrived called by Dante hours earlier, they found a boat full of evidence, recorded confessions, and 2 broken men who had built their empire on blood and betrayal. 3 months later, Celeste stood outside the county jail. As Jake Morrison walked free, his conviction overturned and his name cleared. The man who had once terrified her now seemed small and broken, aged by 5 years of wrongful imprisonment. "I'm sorry," she said as he approached her. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." Morrison studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You weren't ready to hear the truth. Sometimes it takes time to see past the grief." Marcus Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Professor Hayes received 25 years for his role in the cover-up. The illegal dumping operation was exposed, leading to the largest environmental cleanup in the state's history. But for Celeste, the real healing began when she scattered Adrian's ashes at the lighthouse where she had learned the truth. Dante stood beside her, their hands intertwined, as they watched the sun set over the cleaned waters of Moonhaven Harbor. "He would have been proud," Dante said softly. "His death wasn't in vain." Celeste agreed, feeling peace for the first time. In 5 years, it wasn't. As they walked back toward town, Celeste realized that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on to grief, but letting it go. Adrian's memory would live on, not in her anger, but in the justice they had finally achieved and the love. She was learning to accept again. The lighthouse beam swept across the water one last time, and Celeste smiled, knowing that some lights are meant to guide you home, while others are meant to show you the way forward. The End Asterisk. Subscribe for more incredible HFY stories, romance tales, and dramatic narratives that celebrate human resilience and love.